Hi there. This is component 3 of the CEU certification that you were taking on the guidelines for safety as far as sexual abuse, preventing sexual abuse, and looking within the youth serving organizations to develop policies and procedures. And so this is component 3, and component 3 is monitoring the behavior of the youth or adolescents. And so the goal of this particular lesson for component 3 is to help prevent, to recognize, respond, and most importantly, you've got to be looking at the inappropriate behavior. And as you're monitoring behavior, you're going to be looking at some significant things that I want to talk about here, and looking at the harmful behaviors and to reinforce the appropriate behavior that's set up within an organization, a ministry, or a youth program, or whatever that is that you're doing, or daycare. But we're talking about monitoring behavior now, and the general principles are simply this. We've got a lot of kids who have been sexually abused, many kids who are coming to school or to programs or going on trips and getting molested there at trips or being fondled right in the school where they are or in the daycare. And so the general principle of this study is to look at monitoring and showing those who are staffed for you or dealing with youth. Monitoring, it simply involves observing. It involves observing all types of interactions or reacting to whatever the kid is doing with another kid or an adult with the kid inappropriately, as well as how to act appropriately. And this principle of this study also includes issues as far as policy and procedures for the employee or the volunteer, even those that's dealing with volunteer to youth and youth to any interaction with adults that they're actually going through one-on-one contact. And so the youth leaders, they're often required, as we know, we're going to need to make sure that they have more supervision because of the fact that a lot of these kids that are leaders in their youth, sometimes they have sexual attraction or they begin to have feelings for a number of reasons. We're going to go through in just a few minutes. But they require more supervision and monitoring because they're young and they lack judgment. And so we got to look harder and screen them even the more. And so I'm hoping that we can define some areas for monitoring based on whatever the organization, the youth program, or whatever kind of organizations you're having, whether it's a daycare or camp or whatever that is, and you are also going to be working on your policy and procedures as you listen to this, how you can establish those missions and those activities to match as far as prevention is concerned while you're monitoring the behavior. And so let's look at monitoring inappropriate or harmful behaviors. Okay, so as I get into this, I want to kind of talk about some areas that are critical, strategies that we got to look at, and responding to what is observed. So let's look at monitoring the inappropriate or harmful behavior. First thing we got to understand is we got to refer to whatever the organization has set up, those policies and procedures regarding behavior, to see what has been inappropriate, what you all are describing as inappropriate versus harmful behavior that needs to be in the policy and procedures very, very clear. And you need to make sure that you include in that whether they're an adult or child leader, they need to understand the boundaries that your organization has established. And they need to identify when someone has crossed that line, and you need to put that in writing. And you need to look at making sure they understand in that policy the potential of possible inappropriate behavior, while they're working for you or while they're volunteering, especially, showing favoritism, and giving gifts and, look at some time, a lot of them will try to find some time along with the kids to say that they just want to mentor them or they really want to comfort them. So we've got to be very, very careful when you're monitoring inappropriate behavior, I keep saying behavior versus harmful behavior. And you got to also look at the next issue that I want to kind of get into is monitoring the potential risk situations. And so we want to acknowledge that some of these situations could pose some risk. And so I'm going to bring some of those out in just a few moments. And then some examples, I'm going to bring as well, especially with kids spending the night or they're doing overnight camp trips or, sometimes these situations are hard to monitor, versus being in a classroom. So or a church, child daycare or children's church. So we're going to look at monitoring appropriate behavior as well. We're going to look at how you acknowledge and praise and encourage the appropriate behavior. And you're going to look at possible rewards for reinforcement for the positive interaction, whether they're a volunteer or an employee. You want to make sure that these are looked at to protect your organization, your ministry, and also to protect those that God has allowed to come within your circle or your organization, for those who are volunteering or even work for you. So you got to recognize it. If the behavior is not good, you got to teach them how to recognize it. You got to teach them how to intervene or to prevent is another word, and respond. Especially if a child that you see that's doing some things I'm going to describe here in a minute, that you don't want to get yourself in, any kind of harm's way, because it could be a very a long drawn out, as I told you before, a long drawn out legal situation, simply because the church is one of the number one places, or that is the faith-based population is the number one populations that courts are being educated on how to sue. And we're gonna keep it real. It is what it is. It's just they come in and they get very close to these kids, and they always want to use scripture and always want to use little gifts and stuff to draw close to them, and then they physically harm them. And why? Because many of these kids are dealing with some symptoms, or they call it sexually maladaptive behaviors, which means that these are risk factors, because these kids have signs of issues that they were facing before they even came to you. And so we got to talk about those things. And so the first thing we got to understand is a lot of times these children would display these abnormal patterns or acting out in sexual manners that, that are very gross. And many times these are normal to them because they do them at home. And 9 out of 10, someone, adult, or maybe their own sibling has incested them or fondled them. And so they're curious. They thought it was fun, or they thought it felt good. So we've got to make sure that we look at those areas and also look at these symptoms of the sexually maladaptive behavior. So what is that? So what sexual maladaptive behavior is, it's behavior that occurs primarily across the board. It doesn't matter if the kid is coming from a disadvantaged home. It doesn't matter if the kid is rich. It really doesn't matter, but it can range in the severity of all kinds of levels of harm with the child emotionally, because they have these sexual behavior problems that begin to try to cluster in a whole lot of different ways that cause them to act out or invite others to touch them or have sexual encounters with them, but then they would switch the script and say that they violated them when actually they were, actually inviting that thing on because it's been done to them. And so it can be a horrible potential threat to both the child and the adult, especially when a child is very sexually inclined with a bunch of things, because of the risk that they've been in and what they have, actually encountered as far as inappropriate sexual behavior is concerned. And so when children are really struggling with this type of sexually maladaptive behavior, it's important to keep in mind that the majority of these cases, they're not being conducted out of the need for sexual gratification as much as it's, like I said before. They participated because they have experienced it. They went through it. They've been abused. So we want to look at some causes and effects, and then we're going to get into some other symptoms that we got to look at as far as behavior is concerned. And so you can be aware of those when you see those in your midst or when you're working with these types of youth. So some of the risk factors is that they have learned these things, like I said before. These maladaptive behaviors as far as sexual abuse or sexual behavior is concerned, it increase and it causes disturbance in their minds because they have had to act it out or they have had to perform it in a certain way. And, back in the day when we were coming up, we would have the old folks would, especially the men. I know I was one of those because they said, how they say, oh, she's a brick house. So these men would ask my mom, could I come, or either the elders who were overseeing us or whatever, these men, wherever they were, I guess in the house or wherever there was music going on, and they would say, oh, tell, they call me Sandy Faye, tell Sandy Faye to come in here, she can really dance. And so what it is that these men are getting off on and lusting after me doing these dances that I thought was just gratifying to my flesh, because I figured that I was doing something good and that it was really wonderful, when actually they was getting off. These men were getting, themselves all heated and everything, and I didn't learn that until later. But we've got to understand that many of these kids have learned these behaviors. So they have learned to masturbate as a means of self-soothing these emotions. They've been exposed, as I said before, to sexual behaviors at home, or possibly looking at them, media and pornography, because they've gotten a hold to it. Or some of these kids are invited, especially boys, to watch it with their own fathers or cousins or uncles or whatever. And then moved in and out of different foster homes is a big one. Or these kids that are in juvenile probation places. These kids begin to sometimes get sexually violated in these homes when they're supposed to be in the care of the people. And then having been the victim of sexual abuse, rape, or molestation, these are some factors, the reason why these type of behaviors will come up in a setting and put all the kids at risk. And then the other thing is having been the victim of physical abuse, emotional abuse, or neglect. Any of those can also cause a child to be hungry for attention and use the sexual gratification as a way of escape or to make them feel more, loving or more secure, or not rejected. And then exposure to others being made the victim of unwanted sexual acts. So the exposure to others being made the victim of unwanted sexual acts. So when they're being exposed to others, they've been made the victim of unwanted sexual acts. So these things that they've encountered, now they're feeling this is no big deal. Everybody goes through this. So sometimes they'll start to impose these acts on others, kids, because they figure, they need what I've got, or I can show them how to feel better. But there are a variety of signs that may indicate this type of behavior that we must monitor, because it may indicate that the child or the youth may be participating in these behaviors. And so a lot of times, if we ignore these, they can indicate a greater problem within the group or within the organization or the church or this camp or whatever you're hosting for them. But some of these symptoms that I'm going to call out in a few minutes, they can be displayed in many ways, especially for those who are partaking in this type of behavior. They can include in a number of these. These are not exhausted. You need to know that there's a number of behaviors that we need to monitor and watch in these kids, because these kids, many of them that have been abused, especially sexually or emotionally, a lot of them, they start to get really, really out of control. And so that's why a lot of them are in a lot of different programs, and a lot of them are in church programs, because they figure if the parents can put them in a church program, they might change. But they need to deal with the emotional issue of the child, especially if they're dealing with the sexually maladaptive behaviors from abuse or neglect or rejection or whatever they're dealing with. These are some of the things that could easily come out of their behavior that we need to monitor. And then one of them is a blatant rebellion. That means they blatantly ignore rules. And then they have a blatant disregard of authority. They don't pay authority any attention. So you got to watch that behavior. If they're in a system or have been in a system, then 9 or 10, they're going to be blatantly disregard authority. They're not going to be obedient to any authority. They're going to treat you like you one of their bros or their friend. And so you got to look at that type of behavior. And then displaying unprovoked aggressive behavior. That means they'll start to be very, very aggressive with things or with others for no reason. And then they lack age-appropriate social skills. That means many times they are acting out ways that most people would think that these are adult type of things that they're doing. That's because they've been made to do adult things, so they're acting that out. They don't know anything else to do but act older, because this is what they have been put in a position to do. So we got to watch those type of kids who seem, how they say, to have this old type of personality, old man, old woman kind of personality, when actually these kids have been put into adulthood positions too soon, and so they act these out inappropriately because they lack their age-appropriate social skills. and then having hidden pornography, especially when they're under the age of 12. They have this type of way that they can go into systems, whether it's computers or getting laptops or getting tapes from other older people and watching these, and of course doing things they have no business, maybe testing out sexual behaviors with others and within their family or group. Many people over the years that I've counseled, because I know I talk about and I talk candidly about when we were coming up, we called it playhouse, where these things were abnormal in our family, but we found ourselves having sex or fondling one another or whatever, or how they say put your finger in there or whatever and move it around, when we felt that, kids started to practice. It was a whole bunch of us because, I told you I came from a large family of 12. And so you start doing these type of things until you come to the understanding this don't make no sense, what we're doing or what we're feeling. You my brother, you my sister. Some never come out, though. Some never break free. And so many have become their own brothers and sisters lovers. And so thank God that didn't happen with me when I come to understand this is crazy. And so disturbing toilet behaviors is the other one. Things that they do. Some girls may stand up or try to turn a different way to pee like a boy, or vice versa. The guys would always sit down to pee rather than stand up, which is the norm based on the sexual, the gender. But they initiate, so they have this disturbing toilet behavior, or they're doing things while sitting on the toilet that don't make any sense. And then initiating inappropriate sexual contact with other children is the reason why this lesson is so important, this component, to make sure that we look at prevention as we monitor these behaviors. Because a lot of these kids are touching other kids, and, your program is one going to be in trouble. Because eventually one of those kids is going to go and tell their parent that little so and Susie or little Bobo touched me, or put his finger on my chest, or put his finger in my butt, or whatever that is. So you got to look at this inappropriate sexual contact with other children because of what they have encountered. And then rubbing one's body against the other. This is very, very prone with kids who have been through sexual abuse or in the bed with parents having sex, and so they get up in the middle of the night and watch them having sex, because parents don't think that they know what's going on. And many of us, as we have come up in our days, if we keep it real, have had our kids in the bed with us, or maybe thinking that they dead sleep when actually they probably peeping and watching you. And so we need to understand that these kids are getting these visions, and their eyes are getting filled with these demonic things, and some of these demons are being released to these children. And so they begin to rub against others of the same gender. I know I had that situation what happened with my kids, my grandkids, because they didn't know what they were doing, but I believe they witnessed it with somebody else. But I told you little tales up two of my granddaughters, and, thank God I cursed that thing at its root and make sure they understand, this is not right. This is not what you do with one another. And one thing we got to know is that we got to call a spade a spade. These kids are doing these things with one another, and we keep on saying they're just playing around. No. These are spirits that has been released and are trying to come up from generations, and why we got our eyes closed to the matter, or we are ignoring the fact that these spirits are trying to overtake these kids, and these spirits of lust and perversion are leaping over in generations that we're spiritually ignorant about. That's all the devil wants you to do, is close your eyes to it and say they're just playing, so they can become lesbians, so they can become lovers of their own siblings. Lord, help us today. And then, rub against one another, then repeatedly exposing oneself in public settings. I've had cases where that has happened before, too, where parents don't know what to do with these kids, where they're exposing themselves. And I had a case one time. A lot of these kids, these spirits are talking to them. One little boy I had in my summer youth program one time just kept on pulling himself out and showing it to the kids, and I didn't know what was going on. They'd be over there screaming and laughing. And then I asked the one who was volunteering with the kids group, what's going on in that group? And they said, I need to talk to you. And I'm like, why will you wait that long to tell me that? That is very serious, because now they're going to go and tell their parent. And they did exactly that. Thank God that it was, and I hate to say it, but it was a situation where a little boy did not take his medicine that morning. The mother forgot to give him his medicine, and whatever kind of medicine it was, because she lied, because that's one of the requirements that we have, is that you got to tell us what kind of medication these children are on, and she put down none. And so on the application. And so you've got to make sure that you have your policies plain and your applications are very clear to find out what these kids have encountered, what they're going through, and what type of medical or psychological difficulties they may be going through, so you can know how to handle these things. But long story short, I had to put the little boy out of the program for a week or so to get this thing straight. But the mother finally brought in, and we had a meeting. He didn't do anything to him. He was just showing it to him, and they would laugh, and he was just steady showing it to him, like, look. And I'm like, oh, my God. And so we got to know that many of these things are going on, and the parent was just distraught that he had done that, and then she realized she had not given his medicine. And I just looked at her like, what is that going to do for me? And I feel for you that your son had to have this medicine, he's going to act out. But you say he's on the application here that he had no problems. He had no mental issues. And so we have to know that how to deal with these populations and where to put them in what group. But anyway, long story short, we need to make sure that we go a step further as far as making sure we monitor those type of things when kids begin to expose themselves and then causing harm to one's own genitals. He began to do that and then started talking about it hurting him and, because he was squeezing and all that stuff. And I don't want to get too much graphic at that, but it was those kind of things that was going on. The kids were just very disgusted by it. And so he was rubbing his own self and squeezing his own self, and that was the next thing I just said, and that is constantly causing harm to his own genitals. And the next thing is inserting objects into one's genitals or anus. I didn't see him do that. I didn't get any report of that, but I've heard of kids that would do that. We know we got adults that use sausages and bananas and everything else. And so a lot of these kids are watching the parents or have found the vibrators and things like that and testing them out. Come on now, we're going to keep this real. Many of these kids are picking up a lot of this stuff from their own parents, and they come to church with these things, especially these single parents who want to call themselves what they call set apart and anointed and sanctified when actually they're not sanctified because they got their plastic or their artificial husband or spiritual husband right there, the vibrator. And these kids are getting involved with these same activities because they figure there ain't nothing wrong with it. Mama love God, but she got this thing right here and she uses it. So I'm going to try it too. I know I'm talking to somebody. So anyway, inserting the object, and then touching the genitals of animals. That's another thing to watch. If the kids are going to somewhere and they're watching these animals, or you got a kitten over there, whatever, they're constantly playing with them or putting their finger in, you got to watch these things. And then try to insert one's tongue into another person's mouth when kissing. That's serious. We got a lot of kids when they put their lips on you, which it should not be. Matter of fact, you shouldn't have no kissing, period. Not on the cheek, no nothing. Not even on the hand. Because these kids take that stuff as intimacy, as love, as, something personal and secret and good to them. And so they will want to try to insert their tongue in your mouth when you kiss them. That says a whole lot because 9 out of 10, some adult is making them get them tongue in their mouth. And then displaying an extreme and an inappropriate curiosity about the body parts of other children, about the way they're shaped, or adults, how they're shaped. They got a big butt or rear end, or they got big boobs, or, did you see her leg or her thigh, or start to talk about their arms or whatever that is. You need to know when they start having this extreme or inappropriate curiosity about it or asking about it or, saying stuff, you got a big old, the kids call it dunk or whatever it is. You got to watch those things because many of these kids are being told things or taking those things and comparing one another's genitals to see who's larger or whose butt is bigger or that kind of thing, or whose breast is coming out, whose breast going. Because I know when we was coming up as girls, we would compare each other's breasts to see who's bigger and whatever. So, these kids are doing this stuff. But because of the spirit of perversion has been released in the world today, many of these kids are taken to another whole other dimension. They're not just looking at the breast. They're touching it. They're putting their lips on it. They're actually sucking it and embracing them and sleeping with them and touching them. I'm just going to keep it graphic and real because you better make sure that you monitor these behaviors because those kids that are put in your care and you don't recognize and respond to these things, you're going to have yourself a case in court. And so then the next one is touching other children or adults in inappropriate ways. I think I've said that. Making crude movements associated with sexual acts. They start doing all kind of body movements and things like that, or just showing their bodies and opening their legs back and forth and doing stuff that make them be, like they're doing sexual type of dances or whatever that they say that looks good and sexy. And these are just children or teens. And so adults have caused them to do that, or people have caused them to do that, or maybe giving them money or said things to them to make them want to do it more and better. You've got to watch it when these things are said, oh, show me how you do that. Show so-and-so how you did that. Girl, she do it good. Oh, no, I don't think so. These things, they come out as a little joke or something to play with or something. Everybody got a little dance contest or whatever. But these behaviors have to be monitored because they are inappropriate behaviors that will be a risk to your organization or your church. And then finally, you need to, they're asking other children or adults to engage in these sexual acts with him or her. So you got to watch, because after they start asking them to engage, the first thing they're going to say is, she wanted to do it, or they told me to do it, and I didn't know. I just was doing it because everybody else was doing it. Still, you're the one in your organization, and you as a leader is the one going to be in trouble, because you need to monitor these behaviors. Now, many of these kids, some of the effects of these things I just described, these are some of the things that could occur or has occurred, maybe still be occurring because of where they are. And the first one is they have difficulty in school, they have academic failure, their grades are low, they are drastically have a low self-esteem. They have a drastic low self-esteem and self-worth. They develop an addiction to some type of substance. I don't care if it's taking a pill or if it's cutting themselves. So they release the blood and feel better, and then they'll take something to try to numb themselves out. So they'll use or have a dependence for the substance and abuse themselves. Or they'll lack the ability to create or maintain a relationship. They cannot do it because all they feel is that they got to prove themselves sexually, or they got to do something to make them feel that they're worth something. And then they lack the ability to create and maintain romantic relationships. So that means when they get to a certain teenage or getting up as a young adult, they have a difficulty in doing that because of what they went through sexually. And then they have an they interact with the legal system. They have a difficult problem to interact with the legal system, and then they are usually involved with the legal system. They have issues with incarceration. They have to register as a sex offender many times. And then they have the inability to acquire and maintain employment. So this happens to them. Now, here's some co-occurring disorders that come with this as far as monitoring and looking at the behaviors so that you can make sure that your volunteers or your staff won't get involved with a potential inappropriate behavior with one of these, especially these that I described earlier on. Many of them are having some psychological disorders. And some of those examples of that are as follows. They have anxiety disorder. They are antisocial, so they have antisocial personality disorder. They have attention deficit. Many of those kids today that have a ADHD or hyperactivity disorder, many of them are being abused sexually. Many of them even being abused physically because they can't contain themselves or they can't be still. They got to be doing something. And then communication disorders. Many of them cannot communicate what they're feeling or what they're seeing, and so they get abused. They have conduct disorder. They're constantly blatantly rebellious. They have depressive disorders. They're constantly depressed and can't seem to want to do anything different other than just stay shut off from everybody and only have maybe one person they want to draw close to. And then that one person, they begin to do these things that are inappropriate with them because they know that the child wants to be with them. And so this learning disorder is another issue. Then the oppositional defiant disorder. That means they constantly are defiant, constantly blatantly rebellious and boldly doing things and don't care what the risks are, don't care who it's going to hurt or whatever. They are very oppositionally defiant. And, of course, the use of substances and substance abuse disorders. And so I'm going to close with this. I want to talk about some critical strategies that you need to do to respond when you have observed this behavior. The first thing you need to understand in your policy, you need to tell them based on what you just heard that I've described here, these type of maladaptive sexual behaviors is the biggest issue. That's why I always bring that particular issue out. And also because this study, this CEU study, is about preventing child sexual abuse within your organization or your church or ministry. And so I want to talk about some critical strategies for monitoring the behavior and responding to what you see. So first of all, your organization got to be prepared to respond. You can't just ignore it or try to push it under the rug. I don't care if they are even a relative. You got to make sure that their employee understand, have signed off to the requirements and the policies and procedures of what is right to do, and have that process. So the first thing you want to look at when you look at the strategy for the monitoring of behavior, the first thing you want to develop a monitoring protocol so that the employee or the volunteer is very clear about their roles and their responsibilities. And you want to make sure that they be prepared to respond immediately. Don't wait. You know, like my group did, just waiting, and the thing had already happened the day before, too. And then they're going to tell me after the kids start screaming more and more and more that the boy is flashing himself and showing himself. So we want to act, they need to act immediately to any inappropriate or harmful behavior and anything that looks like a potential risk. Don't just wait till it become a risk. If it looks like it may be getting out of order with some of the things I just described, you know, or any personal boundaries that may be violated by these children that are getting other kids or even any other adult in the midst of this thing that they are doing. And then the other portion of this critical strategy that you want to take is you got to enforce the protocol so that the appropriate actions can follow through. So that means you got to have some type of documentation, an incident form or something. That means as a supervisor, you need to redirect. You need to look at any inappropriate behavior, and you got to show the staff, or you may have to have some in-service training on how to promote positive behavior, how to confront inappropriate behavior or any behavior that looks harmful, and how to report these behaviors when necessary that have caused a threat or look like it may be a potential threat. And so you need to look at how to report, how to look at when people are causing breaches in the policy, any allegations of suspicion of abuse for the child, or any inappropriate behavior, you know, or potential, anything potential. You got to make sure that those are clearly stated out in your policy and that they can sign off that they are aware and that they are clear about these, protocols. Because if you don't, then next thing they're going to say, well, I didn't know that. They act like it was no big deal. It's just the boy is only 4 years old. Well, no, I don't care if he's 4. If he's pulling his little self out and showing it and telling kids to touch it, there's something wrong with that. And then the roles and responsibilities. All employees should be responsible for monitoring the behavior regardless if they're a volunteer or not. I just feel that those responsibilities or any behaviors that they're interacting, within the organization or the church or ministry, everyone needs to know how and what to monitor. They need to understand and define their roles when they're in these positions about monitoring these types of behaviors that I just described. And that means that it could be when they get the job description, or it could be that a specific employee or a specific volunteer needs to know from the very beginning when they are going to be involved with kids. They need to have all of this in the job interview process. Don't just wait till later on you want to create these policies, these protocols, when they should have been up front when they got hired. They need to understand these right away, because these are some things that can shut the organization and ministry down and be in a legal or bad legal battle. And so then the next thing you want to be sure that you're clear about reporting the structure within the organization. You need to be very, very clear about reporting structure. And what I'm saying is that your organization should have a well-defined reporting incident structure, so people will know who to contact if they see something, or who to contact if they need to hurry up and get some type of authority there, especially if they're observing some type of potential threat or inappropriate behavior. And so when you're looking at the clear reporting structure, you want to make sure that all the employees are required to report any kind of behavior that seems going to be a threat, as I said earlier on, and especially if it looks like it's going to be harmful or something that, that's going to cause you to have to be called on the carpet with a parent. And so you want to establish the direct line and backup reporting system within an organization or that ministry. And that backup option, it should be somewhere around the, area of, like I said, maybe a form so you can write out any incident that was involved or any direct communication or direct line with any authority, or you need to have direct communication with someone who may be overseeing these types of incidents, whether they're sexually inclined or whether they're just physically abusive or whatever verbally. So we got to make sure you got someone in authority that maybe they can talk to or, process the incident with. And then you want to create a climate that encourages people to question confusing or uncertain behavior practices. So you need to have that open, that people can be open to discuss these things. Or do like I do. I believe in having a quality assurance concerns and suggestion form where they can say, I'm concerned about this. I have a suggestion about this because of what they see or what they're observing or what they're monitoring or trying to expose based on what, they've encountered with this child or what they are witnessing from an adult with the child. And then finally, the last two that I'm going to cover is observation and contact with the employee or the volunteer. What you got to know is that your organization have to use several type of monitoring methods to get a clear picture of how these individuals are interacting with these children. Because if you don't have a clear picture of what you want to call inappropriate versus appropriate, then anything can go down. So the first thing you want to do is you want to use a formal supervision. And that means you want to include regular evaluations of what is going on with that teacher or that volunteer. And then you want to use informal supervision. And that includes regular and random observations. And that means you constantly check in, you're looking at interactions throughout the activity periods with these kids, with that individual, whether they're an adult or a teen, leader. You want to do this because you want to maintain this frequent contact with them so that you can see whether or not if you can even, when you're going off-site, so you'll know how to maintain appropriate monitoring to make sure this child, nothing is happening to them when you go off-site. Because it's just so much happens when you leave. Look like when you leave the church or leave the ministry, something else comes up or they share something with the parent that you knew nothing about because you didn't have your appropriate monitoring an observation, evaluation process in place for the volunteer or the employee. And then finally, I'm going to close out with this. I know you're like, Lord, my God. Documentation is very important. I see this happen all the time. People just do not want to document. This is why we got a lot of preachers and leaders today who are counseling people, who are counseling children, who have these maladaptive sexual behaviors or have these bad aggressive behaviors, or that have been in and out of systems or been in and out of juvenile or very, very, aggressively rebellious or blatantly, just doing everything you can name. They just as they say, oppositionally defiant. They just do all kind of disorder. You already know that, but yet you want to put them with the same population who are trying to be obedient? I don't think so. You've got to learn how to document and look at monitoring everything that we discussed here. Documentation for that monitoring have to occur. So that means if it's been good, whoever was there in that department, then you need to have some type of evaluation process so that you can leave almost like a fire drill or come back every month, every 2 weeks or whatever. Every week look like almost now. It's so easy for a child to start flipping out and doing stuff that's all of a sudden they want to start playing with themselves and touching other people because somebody all of a sudden touched them. And so although it may be clear with other, children that may have been through some type of sexual abuse, and then, or maybe other children that may have these type of incidents that's been going on in the past somewhere else, but you got to have this in place because this sexual adaptive, behavior, you got to look at the fact that these prevention strategies and these screenings and these environmental policies will help you when you implement them. So it'll be harder for these type of situations to come in without, how to say, nipping it in the bud. And so it'll be really hard, though, if you don't put these documentations in place. It's going to be hard because now you're going to have inadequate information. Things are going to be occurring that you don't know that really happened or who's involved. See why? Because documenting these things, what it does, it helps you to have a log or a tracking system to see what occurred. You look at the instances that have been recorded on the documentation for whoever it was, the employee, the child, or the volunteer. So what it does, it makes a non-negotiable type of, prevention model so that the organization won't go through those type of hits, won't have these type of undiagnosed, unaware types of, hits in the spirit realm or in the natural when it comes to these kids who need help that are coming in. And because we're not doing the strategic observation and documentation, then now you've got a case that is really hard to fight when it comes to kids saying that somebody touched them. It's very long drawn out, especially when these kids today are taught how to lie. And so we got to look at that it's non-negotiable. You got to look at ways that you're going to have to input these things in the job description and or doing prevention, intervention, in-service training for documentation, proper documentation, and also to have these abuse prevention efforts as you're showing them how to document and monitor these behaviors with both the staff, as I said, and any people that are dealing with the children. You're going to use these written records to help you provide this reinforcement to have good supervision and safety for all those that are involved in your facility or your youth program or your church, especially when you're dealing with children that may have been sexually abused or have been in some type of violence or some type of sexual encounter with an adult in the past, or just having so much emotional distress. So you're going to have to know how to monitor the behavior so that other kids won't be spiritually infected and physically abused or have been, approached by a child who may be suffering with maladaptive sexual abuse. God bless you. I pray that this helps you on monitoring behavior. Take care.